You're live.
I'm live. Hey y'all, I'm James Wright, and welcome to the shop. Tonight, we're going to be having a good time because we're going to be playing Mortal Kombat. Finish him! Okay.
He's been waiting all day for that.
There's a reason that Sarah tells most of the do.
Yeah.
We're going to have a good bit of time talking about finish, which is a very broad term, and if left to my own devices, I would probably talk for hours and we're going to be here for about the next hour. Interesting things going on right now. I do have one new thing that we added.
Oh, your mic's not on?
My mic's not on. Uh-oh. Let me make sure I put the right mics on. I was doing some weird recording tonight. No, it should be on.
You're all yelling.
There we go. Now I have a voice. That's what I get for recording. Yes. So, things going on. I added one new item to the shop because I'm doing the iron test, which is
Error. YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming.
yeah, it's going to give you that. It's tonight. Don't worry about that.
Oh, I gotcha. Like there's something else going on.
Yeah, what was I saying? Oh yes, I'm doing the iron test, and I actually added 2 more irons this week. So it's now up to 23 different irons we're going to be testing. Yes, we're testing them all. But I've had a couple people asking, is there some way that I can support that specifically? And so we were talking about doing this. So this is actually, because I'm making, what is it now, 28,000 curls, I decided to bottle up a few of them. And so we got these completely out of focus jars. So we got these cute little jars that actually have some of the curls from the test in it, and it has written on there, plain iron test and hickory. So if you want a piece of the project and want to support the project directly, those are now available on the website. So fun idea. I don't know if they're really worth it, but some people are asking for something like that. So there you go. Plus you can set it on your shelf and actually have a piece of the project. Oh yes. Well, let me just. We will be doing a giveaway a little later for shirts, but I forgot. They have I just back up 2 years ago. I ordered a bunch of puzzles of the backdrop of my shop, which really makes for a fun project, fun puzzle, because it's so much detail. You can pick up a piece and know exactly where it goes. And they were great. I made like 6 of them 2 years ago, and a lot of people really like that. And so I decided to do another run. Those will probably be becoming available in the next week or 2. So there's only a few of them, and I'm probably going to do like 1 batch a year for Christmas, because that's when a lot of people like puzzles. So stay tuned for that. We got super chats
2
already.
super chats.
What do we have? Alan, we demand Sarah's bench update.
Shush!
Okay, I'm shushing up.
Sarah's bench update.
Okay.
Sadly, nothing to report because Sarah crashed this weekend and went kind of cashing with the kids. So hopefully this weekend. We're not doing anything this weekend. So hopefully we can get some work done. You know, like maybe if COVID would go away for a while. Are you recording me from that camera too?
Yes, I am.
It's a good thing I don't have my jammy pants on tonight.
Yeah, because her being a nurse, everything's
in the middle of a pandemic, you know.
It's
trying
fun.
to staff a hospital. It's fun.
Let's see, Aaron Fenn has a question. I can't quite read it.
Here, it says, I have a question about the plain test spreadsheet. I would like to hear a quick overview to make sure I am reading it correctly.
Yes, for those of you who are either patrons or members here on the channel, people have clicked the join button. I have given the view to the spreadsheet. And there really isn't a good way to talk about it without actually showing you. So why don't you send me an email and I'll respond to you directly. But basically what we're doing is we're doing 40 strokes on the hickory, testing its sharpness, 40 strokes, test its sharpness, 40 strokes, test its sharpness, and seeing how it progresses. So the higher the number, the duller the iron. And as it progresses along that chart, you'll see the iron get duller and duller. So it's kind of interesting to see how some of them get really dull really fast and then kind of taper out, and some of them kind of have an even gradual curve. And it's very interesting to see the comparisons and how many are very similar and some that are very different. So yeah, lots of that coming.
So he clarifies a little bit, specifically on the line graph. Is it correct to say that the lower the bar on the right, the better it performed?
Well, yes and no. The lower the number, the sharper it is at the end. And if you there's a key in the top right, top left corner that talks what the number means in sharpness. So from the absolute physically sharpest that steel can be to just dropped on the concrete floor. There's a range there. But yeah, if you want to see that, patrons and members have access to that in their sites. So.
I'm okay.
I'm listening.
We have 2 mom jokes due.
Oh, we got 2 mom jokes. You ready for them?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. What do you
I was
got?
born ready. What happens once in a minute, twice in a moment, but never in a decade?
What?
The letter M.
Yeah, that is your joke.
Excusez-moi.
There is no excuse for moi. What's the next one then?
What do you call a chicken-proof lawn?
A chicken-proof lawn. What?
Impeccable.
I like that one. That was good. That was good. Okay, enough with the shenanigans. Let's jump into finish. Now, this is a topic which I'm going to be starting many arguments tonight. There are a lot of differing opinions and different thoughts, and the term finish really covers a lot of things that might be finish and might not be finish. So I'm going to try and go an overview over different types of finish and classifications. And then anytime you classify things, there's always going to be some gray area in between classifications. So let's actually kind of look at that. And so I have things set up over here. Whenever you go to the big box store, you're going to see you'll see an entire row of these cans set up one after another. And most of these are actually different types of thinners. And this gets very, very confusing when it's out of focus. There we go. Let's move this in here. We've got different things like, what do we have? Pure gum spirits. You've got mineral spirits or white spirits if you're overseas, denatured alcohol. And basically, these are all different types of thinners. These don't actually do anything to the wood directly. These help suspend other particles, and then some of these evaporate quickly, leaving behind the particles. Some of these act as a lubricant, but most of the time, these will then disappear from the finish as it cures. So generally, these thinners are not considered finishes. However, they're kind of thrown in with everything because a lot of times you will find these thinners in the different finishes. And especially when you start getting into homemade mixes, a lot of them take thinners and they use it to suspend different things, or in many cases to thin them out so that they can absorb deeper into the surface. So I don't generally consider these finishes, but it's something I have to mention because I'm going to be talking about them a lot more. Next up on the spectrum is stains, dyes, and coloring agents. Now, these generally aren't finishes. They had no protection. They don't stop water movement. They don't really do anything to protect the wood. They just color it. And for things like that, we're going to be looking at a lot of stains. And so stains come in a bunch of different types. You have your oil-based, you have your water-based, you have gel stains. And each one of them have different applications, but basically all they're going to do is they're going to add a color. And most of the time with a stain, you're trying to make one wood look like another wood. And usually you're trying to make some wood look like walnut. And that's what most stains are for, is a lot of people want walnut, but they don't have walnut, they have oak, and they want their oak to look like their walnut. So you mix in a stain and it kind of gets it close.
That's nuts.
But for some reason, a lot of people think stain is finish. Stain is not finish. It's a color before the finish. And sometimes you can actually mix the stain in with the finish, but the stain itself doesn't protect it. Now, other types of coloring you can get into dyes. I don't use dyes much as they are more complicated and more difficult, and 90% of the time I'm using stains, unless I'm wanting something really weird like a blue tint, in which case I might get a blue dye. This is a trans tint dye. I use this actually for mixing in with epoxy sometimes if I want to get a wood tone with it. Other coloring agents, this is actually vinegar and iron. So I have steel wool that I dissolved in the vinegar here, and so it looks like liquid rust. But if I mix this in with a high tannin wood like oak, I'll get this really gorgeous black blue so you can make oak almost look like ebony with this. And it's just iron. You're mixing it with the wood and the tannin reacts with it. It's kind of cool.
In your line of work, black and blue looks okay. We don't want people looking black and blue in my line of work.
Yes. Other things you can get are, what is the word I'm looking for? Ammonia gassing, and there's all sorts of other things like that that will tint the wood and color it, but they don't actually protect it. So I don't generally consider these finish, but they kind of go under the big classification of finish. So next up, we're going to start talking about oils. And oils are, you'll see me do a lot with boiled linseed oil. And this is kind of the gray area where you start to get into a finish. Simple oils, like your mineral oil doesn't polymerize. It doesn't harden. It doesn't become a plastic. And so mineral oil can be washed out of a surface. So it's not really a finish. But what it will do is it'll go into the wood grain and give you that wet wood look. And that's usually the natural color that people are looking for, unless you want the pure wood look, which is not wet. We'll be talking about that later when we start getting into water-based. Oil gets into the surface, and oil will slow down the moisture transfer. Mineral oil is really nice because you can basically drink it. Well, a lot of simple oils you could drink, though I don't think you really want to. Bad memories. But these are great for cutting boards and things that are going to be coming into contact with food. The problem with mineral oil is that it doesn't polymerize, so it can get washed out of the wood pretty easily. And so then you start mixing in with other things, like you'll have the feed and wax. This stuff is what a lot of people do. It has oil mixed in with some wax, beeswax, and then a couple other things that kind of slow down the oil leaving. They don't really protect it, but this will slow down the mineral oil getting out of it. And so this is great for food surfaces where you're going to have to reapply it occasionally, but it will give you a little bit of protection. It'll give you the color that the natural wood comes from, but it's not really a pure finish. Boiled linseed oil is kind of the next step up. It's a polymerizing oil, and there's a lot of oils out there that polymerize. In other words, they don't exactly dry. The chemical chains start to come together and polymerize. They get longer and longer, and to the point that they're no longer liquid and they're locking together. And at that point, they don't exactly wash out of the wood very easily. And so linseed oil will polymerize, but it can take a month or more. If you boil the linseed oil, which I have an entire video, it's not actually boiling, you're just heating it up to a point at which the polymerization takes over. Or if you add chemicals to it to make the polymerization happen faster, which is what happens with the store-bought oils, this will add a little bit of protection. It's not a lot of protection. You're not going to protect the surface from scratches and dents and dings, but the color will stay a little bit longer. And then the boiled linseed oil, it really just adds that wood tone that really brings out a lot of color. And so this is where you start to get into actual finishes, things that are going to protect the wood, but they're not yet giving you a film finish. So with the boiled linseed oil, it soaks down into the wood and will fill the fibers, but you still feel the wood on top. You're still coming into direct contact with the wood after this finish. We'll talk about wood color transfer a little bit later. So now we're going to start getting into film finishes. Then there's things like soap finishes, which then you're really starting to get into artisanal finishes. These will be what you'll use for, it's very common in Eastern Europe and Scandinavia and that area to have soap finishes, and actually to do wood floors and things like that with soap. Nice thing about it is if you get water on the floor, it's kind of self-cleaning. It's a nice surface to have. It's not a very protective surface. It's not a film finish, but it will give you a stop of slowing the water going into the wood and coming out of the wood. It adds a little bit of color to it. So that's kind of like halfway between oils and film finishes, and then we start to get over into the waxes, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Now we're going to start to get into what most people consider finishes. These are film finishes. They've actually put a protective layer on top, so when you touch the surface, you're not touching the wood, you're touching the finish that goes on top of it. And that can go anywhere from something as light as a coat or two of a wipe-on poly to something as thick as a bar top epoxy. And then you have this whole spectrum in between those of how thick do you want that film? Do you want a buildup that is so thick that nothing can get through it? Or do you still want that really nice clean wood look? One that I use a lot is Rubio Monocoat. This is a hard wax finish, not to be confused with hard wax, but it's actually a chemical wax that it's hard to describe. It is a film finish, but it doesn't feel like a film finish. This feels like a boiled linseed oil finish, but it gives you a protection that others do. And this is one of the reasons why I love it. It gives you the color and tone of boiled linseed oil. It gives you the finish and look of boiled linseed oil, but it's protective like a film finish.
Is that what's on our table?
Yes. It's good stuff, and it fixes easily. You ever have a problem with it, you can just rub it around and you get a spot, then you just put more on there, and it can't double coat, so you never have to worry about one spot being darker than another from it. So it fixes easily, it goes on easily, 15 minutes and the finish is done. It's incredibly simple. The problem is it's expensive. Our table was around $100 in finish, which is expensive.
But with 3 children in.
Yeah, but it's worth it. I mean, you put it on there and it lasts for a long time. You have polyurethane. Now, polyurethane usually comes a good bit thicker. And what you can do, the problem with it with a thick film is if you put it on there too thick, the surface looks ripply. So if you thin it out, use a thinner, mix it in there, you can get on a thinner film. And you thin it out enough, you can actually get to the point where you can wipe it on with a rag. And you can get a thin film, let that dry, put it on another thin film, and put thin film after thin film, and eventually you'll build up a really nice, clean, smooth surface. And the nice thing about that is you can stop at different levels of thickness and get that exact look you're going for. And so usually, if I don't want to spend the money on Rubio Monocoat, wipe-on poly is what I'm going to use. Closely related to that is Waterlox. It is, actually, I don't know if it is a poly. It acts and feels and looks and tastes just like a poly. I don't remember what, I think it's considered a poly. But there are a lot of mixes at this point where you start to get, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and there's a shellac mixed with a varnish, and then it has this particular thinner and a little bit of wax mixed in. And you get a lot of weird finishes like that. Then you also have shellac. Now, shellac is kind of the old school standby, good traditional finish. It's actually made from bugs. You can, once this is cured, you can eat it. It's really not a problem at all. Again, like the wipe-on poly, you want to put it on thin film after thin film, and you can build this up really thick. The problem with shellac is that naturally it comes with a bit of a color. And even when you get clear shellac, it still has an amber tone to it. So if you're looking for that boiled linseed oil wood tone, you start running into problems with shellac. Then we have some of the new ones like the polyacrylic. This is a water-based poly. So just like the regular poly, but rather than thinning this, you actually thin this with water. So it doesn't need one of these thinners. You can actually just thin it down with water and wipe it on. The nice thing about this is when it dries, it gives you a raw look to the wood. So it looks like there's no finish on there at all in its color and tone. It looks just like it did before you put finish on. And a lot of people really like that. Personally, I'm like, no, I want the wood tone. I don't want that raw, unfinished look. Then you can get into varnishes. Usually varnish is what you're going to use for your exterior. This is a very thick film finish. It goes on and builds up again. But for a lot of boat builders and things like that, varnish is the way to go. And then you can get into, there's all sorts of other, what's the other one? There's varnish and lacquer. Lacquer is kind of out of style. Very, very few people actually use lacquer anymore. It's a much more difficult finish, but it's very similar to most of your varnishes. Yeah, so I don't have a whole lot of experience with lacquer. Yeah. So then the next step up is the big film finishes, such as your bar top epoxies. This puts such a film on there that no air, no water, no nothing gets through there. It's protected beyond protection, but it looks like there's a layer of glass on top of it. Some people like that, some people don't. And then the next classification over is your waxes. Paste wax. This is something that some people think is a finish by itself, and it really isn't. It's something that goes on top of the finish. This doesn't protect a whole lot. It's basically just a wax to go on and fill the pores. And the things that this will do is, number one, it will give you a little bit higher gloss. It will give you a smoother feel to the touch. And it will also slow down the water transfer. So if, like me, on a lot of my hand tools, I want to feel the wood, I want a raw wood feel, I'm going to put boiled linseed oil on it. Surprise, surprise. This doesn't really protect the wood. And then I'm going to put paste wax on it. And this really doesn't protect the wood. So I'm really not going with a huge amount of protection, but I'm going with the color. I'm slowing down the moisture transfer, and I still am coming in full contact with the wood. And so it feels very, very good in the hand. But would I put this on furniture? No, because furniture, I want more protection. That way I'm going to go for an extra finish. So that is a very quick run through on classifications and types, and everything is going to fall into that. And I know we're going to be getting a whole bunch of questions, because at this point then people start asking about specifics and mixes. And then there are all sorts of finishes out there that will take a thinner and they'll mix in a dye and they'll put it with a protective coat, and then they'll put another protective coat, and they'll have this like mixture that's their specialty that they really, really like. And then I prefer to actually keep them separate and do them step by step. I will dye the wood, get the color I'm looking for, and then I will mix in a little bit of oil that will soak down in and get a little bit deeper into the surface. And then I will put on a film finish that will actually protect the wood. And then I'll put on a wax to seal that film finish and give me the sheen I'm looking for. So I'll take it step by step rather than trying to mix it all together, because mixing it all together, then you get this finish that doesn't really absorb as well and doesn't finish quite as well. And it's just kind of, it's not my way to go. So do we have any direct questions? Actually, no, there was one question asked right at the beginning, and that would be a good one for right now.
Breathe, man.
Sorry.
Breathe. Oy. They say men don't talk. You just got to get them on the right topic. Anyways.
That's about right.
Brigette Anderson-Atkins, what she asked. Good evening. When is smooth too smooth for finishing? When should you sand after you've smoothed with a plane or card scraper? Yes.
Okay. Now, there are two main types of wood surfaces. Well, okay, there's four, but I'm going to break it down into two basic ones. You have a planed surface, which means that all of the fibers have been sliced. All of the pores are wide open. And that makes it sound like it's really, really good for finish, getting in there and getting deeper and getting a better hold on it. And then you have sanding, which is actually smoothing out the surface, but it's filling all the pores with the dust. And no matter how much you wipe it and blow it and clean it off, you're still going to be getting a lot of dust down into that surface. And that sounds like it's bad for finish, and that your finish isn't going to get down as far because the pores are clogged. It's actually the exact opposite of that. A sanded surface will allow oils to get deeper down into it. A planed surface will not allow oils to get down as deep. And the reason is the, what's the tube action? What's the word I'm looking for? Capillary action. There we are. Tube action, you know. With the sawdust in there, it'll actually draw the finish down in and wick it down farther into the surface. So with a sanded surface, you are going to get a deeper penetration. With a plain surface, you're not going to get as deep a penetration. And so then a lot of people think, oh, then you should always sand it. Yes and no. Sometimes you don't want that deep penetration. And especially if you're working with pines and maples and smooth-grained woods, the problem with it is if you sand it, you're going to get blotchy areas. Some areas will absorb the oil deeper than other areas. If you plane it, you're not going to get quite as much blotchiness. You'll tend to get an even amount of oil being absorbed. And so sometimes you want to have that plane surface so you're getting an even color. And sometimes with oaks, you want to get that variation. If you have a quarter sawn oak where you have all those ray flecks in there, you want to see all those ray flecks. And the best way to do that is actually to sand the surface, because the ray flecks don't have any openings. They don't have any pores, so you're not going to get any sand in it. The oil is not going to go deep on those ray flecks. But everywhere else, there's lots of pores. There's lots of big open spaces. And the sand will fill those, the dust will fill those, and the oil can go down deeper and you'll get a darker tone in that area. So with quarter sawn oak, you want to get that contrast between the rays and the open grain. And the best way to get that is to sand it. But if you're working with a maple, you may end up wanting to plane it so you get a more even tone. Now the other answer to that is you could use a pre-finish, which is a whole other thing, none of these. Well, sometimes shellac is considered a pre-finish. And what that will do is it will go in and seal all the pores without soaking in deeply. And that way when you come in with another finish, you can put it on top of that and you'll get a much more even tone. So do you want to sand or plane? You could go either or. Sanded surfaces often, especially with open pore woods, sanded surfaces will often feel smoother because all those pores are filled and you don't feel the actual grain of the wood. Now with maple, a planed surface will often feel smoother than a sanded surface because you don't have the grit on top of the wood. So smoothness, you can get both just as smooth. It just depends on the wood you're working. So yeah, what's the next question?
Okay, going back a little bit, Aaron Fenn asks, what does James mean when he says it won't double coat?
Well, what happens with most film finishes, let's take shellac for example, because shellac is wildly known for this. If you build up layers of shellac, every layer you put on top will make the wood a little bit darker. Every coat you put on will get the tone a little bit richer. The problem with that is if you don't get an even coat across the whole surface the exact same amount, then you're going to get areas that are darker and lighter. Or if you have one area where you get more finish, that area is going to look darker. So if you ever want to, so if I have a table that's been perfectly finished, but there's one spot in the middle that has a scuff or a mark, and I want to refinish that, you're going to have a very, very hard time adding more finish to that area and bringing it up to the same tone as everything else. You're always going to have the spot that looks out of place. Poly is a little bit better at that, but still with poly, the more layers you put on, the darker it's going to get. Waterlocks, exact same thing. The more layers you put on, the darker it's going to get. With Rubio monocoat, you put on one coat, that's all it takes, so you're not building up layers. And if you try to put on another coat on top of the Rubio monocoat, it just doesn't stick to it. And so you end up wiping off what was there before. And so if you have a blotch in the middle that you want to sand out and recoat that one blotch, then you just smear the whole section, and that blotch in the middle is going to absorb as much as it wants. And the other area around it isn't going to absorb anything. And so when you wipe it off, you'll get this perfectly smooth finish. So it's incredibly easy to fix. Most of these other ones are very hard to fix because you're trying to hit one area, and bringing that up to the same tone as what's around it is incredibly difficult. Rubio monocoat, don't even think about it. It's 15 minutes and you're done. There's a reason why I like it.
Mic drop.
What's next?
Oh, let's see. Bryan Mulligan had asked, and if you answered this question, it's because you didn't take a breath and I couldn't tell. Where does shellac fit in?
Shellac is a film finish.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really fun one because it's actually, it's made from not the cocoon. Is it the cocoon? Yeah, it's like it's secretions of bugs. And it goes through. Yeah, and it's interesting. So you actually mix it in with alcohol, with a denatured alcohol. And the nice thing about shellac is that because it dissolves in alcohol, because this is like 60% alcohol. So if I put this on the next surface, on the So I put a coat of this down. The next one I put down, the alcohol from that second coat will actually eat into the first coat. And so you get a pure bond from one to the next. So you get all of the coats end up being one homogeneous thick coat because the alcohol will burn into the previous layer. Most of these other finishes, you end up with multiple layers. And if you ever have anything that gets on in between the two layers, then you could actually have delamination of the layers because they don't actually chemically bond back to the previous layer. Shellac will actually do that. All the pros and cons of different finishes always make it fun. What's the next one? Oh, she's answering something.
Yeah. Let's see. What did Alex say? My only question for today will be, where the heck can we buy the Magical James's BLO?
I have looked several times at selling it. The problem is it would end up being somewhere around like $50 for a quart, just because of making it small scale. I make it about a quart at a time, and it takes, it takes an hour and a half, 2 hours of watching and being careful to get a quart made. So it would be incredibly expensive for me to sell. One of these days, I might actually go out and buy a vacuum boiler, but yeah, today's not that day. So who knows? I'm trying to remember. There's a not total. There are a couple companies that are starting to sell Tried and True. There we are. They actually make a boiled linseed oil that doesn't have any additives in it. I haven't had a chance to try it yet, but I've been told it is good stuff. And there's a few other companies I've recently come across that I want to look into more. So it looks like other people are trying to make just raw boiled linseed oil. Because the problem is you go to the store and it actually comes with chemical hardeners, which aren't bad. It's great for doing it. When I actually finished my bench, I just went and bought a gallon of it and soaked the bench in the stuff. The problem is you don't want it on anything you'd be eating off of, and you have to wear gloves, otherwise it'll get into your skin. Whereas the homemade stuff, don't have to worry about it at all. I could drink this. It's just linseed oil that's been heated up. What's next?
Nothing. Let's see. Tommy Roberts asks, would you lacquer or poly over a painted coffee table or use a certain paint and be okay?
Anytime you're starting to talk about painted surfaces, it really depends on the paint. And I can't say oil-based, water-based. There are hundreds of types of water-based paints. Each one has different things. The problem with paint is that paint tends to be a very flexible surface. Paint is intended to be flexible and stretching as the wood expands and contracts, and paint it has a pressure to it, so it'll expand and push around. So you want to make sure that your finish you're putting on it also has a bit of flexibility. Also, you're going to be being very careful that whatever finish you put on top of it isn't going to change the color of the paint, because most of these will bring some color to the mix. So if I mix a polyurethane in there, I'm going to be adding some color to it. Water locks, I'm going to be adding a lot of color. Shellac, a lot of color. The one exception to that is polyacrylic or a water-based poly. You're not adding any color at all, so you can put this on top of your paint and get the exact same color you had before. And this will give you much more protection. It comes out of there milky white, and you put it on there, it's like, oh no, I've ruined it. But then once it dries, it's perfectly clear. And so this also has a little bit more flexibility to it than some of the other ones. So if you really want that added protection on top of it, I'd probably go with a water-based poly. Do you actually need that? Depends on the wood. If you're working with a hard wood, most of the time the paint's pretty good. If you're working with something softer, like a pine or a poplar, you might get dents where the paint chips off a little bit more. This will help protect that a bit more. But in the end, that's really kind of a personal preference on how much of a protection do you want on top of the paint. And in the end, it's a painted surface. Who would do that? What's next?
Hang on 1 second. Dennis Meko asks, what do we do with that shelf full of 10-year-old cans of Finish?
Most of them, if you open up the can, let them dry out, then you can just throw it away. Once it's dried and cured, then you can throw it away without any problem. The other thing is if you have a bunch of curls, wood curls, put the wood curls in a box and dump the finish into the wood curls, and the wood curls will soak it up and it will dry out much faster than that. You might be careful with that on some finishes, particularly oil-based finishes. If the curls are of just the right size and the box is closed just enough, you might actually get a heat buildup, in which case then the box of curls might spontaneously combust. So do that in a safe place. With wood curls, it's much harder to make that happen. But with paper rags, that is a lot easier to happen. It actually takes very specific circumstances. If the paper rag is wadded up too tight, it won't work. If it's too loose, it won't work. If it's in an open area with a lot of air movement, it won't work. It's really got to be in a trash can underneath multiple layers of trash and compact just the right amount in order for it to build up enough heat. And if you want to see that, I have a video actually showing boiled linseed oil spontaneously combusting in rags. But it is a fluid. Even if I were to dump this out on my floor, I would have no problem at all. If I were to put it into a pile of wood curls, I would probably just spread out the wood curls and wouldn't think much of it. But if it was in a box of wood curls, you might run into problems with that. So just things to think about. And that does go for a lot of the other finishes. Waterlocks has a good oil component. The polyurethane, oil-based, that can also do it. Yeah, shellac, you don't have a problem with that because it's alcohol. But most any of them that are made from an oil that will polymerize will heat. And because as it polymerizes, it creates heat. So there's that. What's the next question? We got a kid invading, wanting electronics.
Where are we at? Aaron Fenn. No, Harold Golden. We'll get to Aaron. Harold Golden asks, can James speak a little about French polish?
Yeah, I hate French polish. I really hate French polish. I never liked the look of it. And it's a pain to do. And it isn't a specific finish or methodology. It is a particular look. Most of the time it's done with a shellac finish, but I've seen people do French polish with a polyurethane. I mean, traditionally it's a shellac. I've seen it done with a varnish. But it is about putting incredibly thin layers on, layer by layer, and usually with a good bit of friction in it to try and heat it up. And it is a very time-intensive process that requires a lot of practice and a lot of patience. I don't like it.
But how do you really feel?
Yeah, no, but there are 100 different methods to do it, and every person you talk to is going to have a different method of how they do French polishing. The way I like to do it is take a rag and wad it up and then put it in another rag so you actually have a perfectly smooth surface about 2 inches in diameter, and so you have this pump of rag that's perfectly smooth, and that will hold finish in it, and you literally take that and rub the surface with it. Some people mix in a little bit of oil in there to slow down the dry on it, which means you have to rub for longer. And it's, yeah, I don't really do it much. So I've done it like 4 times, and every time I'm like, I'm never doing that again.
You're a slow
But I haven't done a
learner.
video on it, so I'm probably going to end up doing it again sometime and doing a video on it. But yeah, it's not my forte so much. So, what's next?
Well, Tom West super chatted.
Ah, Sir Tom, thank you. What does Tom have to say?
Oh, sorry, hang on.
She's yawning.
Oh,
It's been a long day.
Had to get up early to vote. You know.
Yeah, late day at the hospital too.
All right. On what day of the week do chickens hide?
What day of the week do chickens hide?
Mm-hmm.
What?
Friday.
Got it. Did he have a question?
No, he said metal flammable trash cans are cheaper than house fire, kids.
Yes. What I do with mine is actually have a pile of them down here right now. I just lay them out flat until they're hardened, and then they're good to go. If I had a fireplace, I'd throw them in the fireplace.
Well,
But once
just don't use it.
once they've cured and become hard, then you can throw them away. But I just lay them out flat because then the polymerase, the heat doesn't build up and it can spread out. Some people will put them in water. The problem with that is when you take them out of the water, then it starts over again. So it's not really saving them, it's just delaying the actual process from taking place. If you have a metal can, that can work, as long as your metal can isn't up next against a bunch of wood curls.
Are we speaking from experience?
No, I know. I've talked to a couple people. There was actually a wood shop in Ohio, I want to say it was, and they had a fire-safe wood can, but it was next to the sawdust bin, and the wood can had a fire inside. It kept the fire inside, but the can heated up to the point that the sawdust beside it lit on fire, and it was a lot of fun. What's next?
I love how you said that. If I had a fireplace, I'm like, we have a fireplace, we just haven't used it.
Yeah. No, sometimes I'll take them out and put them in the fire ring outside, but haven't done that.
Maybe we'll get our fireplace going sometime. Let's see, Aaron Fenn. I'd like to hear what James has to say about tung oil and Danish oil.
Both of those are terms that really get mixed around a lot and can mean different things to different people. Tung oil, technically speaking, is oil from the tung tree. So it acts a lot like boiled linseed oil. It polymerizes rather quickly. It gives a very similar color to boiled linseed oil. So tung oil is another great oil that I would use quite a bit. It's a little bit slower than boiled linseed oil to polymerize, and the color isn't quite as rich as boiled linseed oil, but it's really close to it. Now, a lot of people consider tung oil as tung oil plus other things, but technically speaking, tung oil is just the oil from the tung tree. Danish oil, on the other hand, is oil plus, usually oil plus a film finish, that can be a lot of different things. And there are people who will say, no, Danish oil is a linseed oil mixed with a varnish. Then people know it is a linseed oil mixed with shellac. And it's basically oil plus something else. And usually it's a film finish, a little bit of a thinner, and maybe a little bit of wax mixed in for the fun of it. So it depends wildly on the person who made it and what they thought was a good finish. That really gets into a lot of the homemade mixes, as usually you're going to have an oil as the base, and then you're going to have a protectant mixed in there, your poly or your varnish, and then you have a thinner, because with the oil and the varnish it starts to get thick and claggy and you get really thick films. The thinner will allow you to thin it out and get a much smaller, thinner film that allows it to get deeper into the wood. Then you might mix in a little bit of wax, but then it gets a little bit too much claggy, and so they'll mix in a little bit more thinner. And so you get all of these wild mixes, and most of those wild mixes fall under the category of Danish oil. That's what you get when you squeeze a Dane. What's next? There's a reason I don't use baby oil.
Anyways.
Why did you marry me again?
I'm trying to remember. Matthew Wright wants to know, have you used Osmo before?
Yes. Osmo is very, very similar to Rubio Monocoat. They're basically the same thing. I like Rubio Monocoat a little bit better. I find that it just it goes on a little bit better. You just can't beat the smell of Rubio Monocoat. It smells like orange trees. It is phenomenal. It's a very, very good smelling finish. And most of these are not good smelling, other than the feed and wax. But this is actually it smells pretty similar actually. Yeah, but Osmo is also a hard wax. But yeah, if Osmo is easier for you to get than Ruby and Monocoat, then go with that. Both of them come in lots of different color mixtures. The Ruby on Monocoat I generally get pure. That's really close to the boiled linseed oil and the color I like. And so tone-wise, it just depends on which one you pick. They're about the same in finishing speed and coating and quality, and they're both very, very good products. What's next?
Boy, Gordon McCall asks, what is the best thinner for polyurethane?
Oil. Well, it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you are wanting to thin out, so you have polyurethane, you can thin it out with, which one is it? It's, here, let me look at the, it's listed on here somewhere. Which is the mineral spirits? There it is. Mineral spirits. And so if you take regular polyurethane and you mix it with mineral spirits 50-50, you end up with wipe-on poly. And I have a whole video showing how to make your own wipe-on poly, because it's a lot cheaper to buy the mineral spirits and the polyurethane, mix them together. It's about half the price as buying straight wipe-on poly. This can is empty. I've had this for I don't know how long, but I keep it so that I can show wipe-on poly. Most of the time I go and get polyurethane and then a can of mineral spirits, which I usually have a large pile of mineral spirits on hand. So I don't think about that as much. But yes, mineral spirits is what you mix it down with. You can thin it out with oil. Now the oil is not going to get as thin as the mineral spirits because the oil is, well, it's thicker. But a lot of people like to do that because the oil gives you that rich oil texture. The oil makes it a little bit slower to dry, so you get a little bit more working time with it. Whereas the mineral spirits tends to dry out pretty quickly, and so if you're working on a large piece, you might get to the point where it is too dry by the time you come back around, and matching back in just doesn't work up right. So oil can do that for you, but I actually haven't had a time where I've thinned it out with oil, but I know several people who really like doing that, so that's another way of doing it. What's next?
Let's see, Harold Golden. I'm getting an orange peel texture when spraying lacquer. Any tips?
Depends on the tip. Usually when you're starting to get a texture on a sprayer, it's that your settings are wrong, your tip size is incorrect. I haven't had a whole lot of experience with sprayers because I've never had a project where I've wanted to do that, and since I'm into all hand tools on the channel, I haven't gotten one for here. I've used them a few in the past before I got into hand tools, but it was something that was, it's almost always more of a pain than it's worth to me, especially if I'm doing something like Ruby on Monocoat, which is just incredibly easy and fast. But usually it's because you're getting too big a drop coming out of the head. It's either that you have too big a hole and your drops are coming out large, or you have too small a hole and they're starting to run into each other and becoming large. But I'm not the best person to ask on that one because I don't have as much experience with it. But most of the time it's your tip and your pressure and everything in that. It could also be that your mixture and how thin it is, if it's not thin enough, but then usually you're running into problems with the gun clogging up on you and doing other horrible stuff. Another reason why I hate sprayers. What's next?
Let's see, Harold asks, can I use rotten stone to polish a film finish, or will it just flatten the surface?
Rotten stone? Is that what you said?
That's what it looks like.
I don't know what rotten stone is.
I don't know, is it like pumice?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
Can I use it to get a film finish? Can you read that again?
Can I use rotten stone to polish a film finish, or will it just flatten the surface?
Ah, okay, I see what you're saying. I don't know what you mean by rotten stone, though, but can you actually polish a finish? Yes and no. Usually, I pick the finish sheen, so I'll pick, a high gloss polyurethane as opposed to a satin urethane poly. And what that will do is my last coat, if it's done well and thin, I will get that sheen on it. But in between, I'm going to use a very high grit sandpaper or a steel wool or sometimes even a paper bag to polish the previous surface to get me a flatter surface, to get rid of dust and junk that might be on there, and also to scratch up the previous surface a little bit so that the next surface can bind to it a little bit better. So usually that's what you're looking for. Now, if you're wanting to polish up a film finish, and this is pretty common with your epoxy bar tops, is that they tend to get scratched up and muffed on top. At that point, you're probably going to want to go and get a polishing compound. I actually like to use headlight cleaner. So the stuff you get at the automotive store for polishing up headlights and restoring those does a phenomenal job of cleaning up epoxy tops. And you can polish out a lot with those. So I'm assuming that's what you mean by rotten stone, as in a polish. Yes, you can do that. A lot of these finishes, in its normal application, you still see a lot of the grain pores coming in there, in which case you probably don't want to do it with that, because then you're just going to be clogging up those open grain pores with your polishing compound, and it's a pain to try and get out of there. But if you're talking about a solid finish where you have a glass smooth top like an epoxy top, then yeah, you can polish out with that. It's just if it's film, if it's matte, that means you have to go to a higher grit polish, and then you have to go to a higher grit polish until you get to one that's glass smooth. That's what I did for my dining room table, but two and a half years ago. You had the big epoxy fills in there and polished it out with that so you can look down through it. So. What's next?
Apparently rotten stone is triply weathered limestone particles.
Yeah, sounds like a type of polish. I've never used it particularly.
Let's see. Let's see. I don't think
lots of different types of polishes.
Just so. FYI for everybody, I don't think we're going to get through all the questions. So if you have specific ones, email James.
Or super chat. We'll answer super chats.
Or super chat. Let's see. Tiny Woodshop. What's a good finish for a pine shaker style side table?
I probably once every other day I get the question of what's a good finish for Project X, and there is no answer to that. It depends on you, it depends on the look you want, it depends on the patience you have. There are so many different things that go into that I cannot answer that. You have to look at the finishes and say, I'm assuming with a side table you're going to want a film finish. Do you want to spend a lot of time with multiple thin finishes? Do you want to get that fringe polished look? Are you looking for something that's matte? Are you wanting something that looks like just a simple oil finish? There are so many things that go into that. Now I say for me personally, on most of the furniture in my house now, Rubio Monocoat is what I go with, just because it's one of my favorite finishes. If that's not an option, then usually my backup is polyurethane, and I'll do it on a thinned out wipe on, and I'll do 5 or 6 coats of that. With poly, I'll do 2 coats of poly, then I'll come in with 400 grit sandpaper, and I'll do 2 coats of poly, and then I'll come in with steel wool, and then I'll do 1 coat of poly, and I'll hit it with brown paper bags, and then I'll do 1 really thin, nice, clean coat of poly on top of that. And that's my normal for that. For Rubio Monocoat, it is wipe it on, wait 15 minutes, wipe it off, and it's done. There's the reason I like it. What's next?
All right. Ronald White asks, thoughts about armor seal?
Armor seal, as in like for cars? I've never used it on wood.
Just reading the question.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never heard it used for furniture before. Usually for car seats and dashes, but I guess it could work on furniture. What's next?
Alan Smith doesn't.
Ooh, sounds spicy.
Doesn't the Sunnyside BLO say no preservatives?
Preservatives, yes. chemical dryers, no, they're different things.
Let's see.
If you buy boiled linseed oil from the store, it has chemical dryers in it, because what they'll do is, rather than heating it up to the point at which the polymerization starts, which is very dangerous because that's right below its flash point, they'll heat it up a good ways where it's still really easy and safe and easy to work with, and they'll add chemical dryers at that point, and that will allow it to polymerize much, much quicker. Faster and easier system, much safer too. What's next?
Bryan Mulligan, what is the best finish / protection for end grain?
Whatever you have on the main surface.
Oh my goodness,
they're all
everybody.
pretty much the same in comparison. So, yeah, whatever you would put on the main surface is what you want to use on the end grain too.
They're all yelling about Armor Seal in the chat.
Oh, okay, Armor. Yeah, okay, sorry.
I'm like, I feel like you should know
I'm thinking of
what this...
Armor All, not Armor Seal.
Oh, okay.
Armor All, yes, no, Armor Seal. Yeah, no, it's yeah, it's good stuff. I don't use Jimbo Finish personally because it tends to be more expensive and it's harder to get. I don't have a Woodcraft around here, so I have to order it in, and so most of the things I get are things that I can buy locally. So I've used it several times. It's a great finish, but yeah. No, I'm thinking Armor All. What's next?
Like, I feel like I've heard of Armor Seal, and I don't really. Okay, let's see. Krischen Allen, what are your thoughts on gel stain? I heard it was one of the best to use.
Yeah, gel stain is great. I don't like it. Personally, I like just the simple oil-based stains. I like I use the simple Minwax. It's cheap. It's easy to get. Everyone's got it. I find it to go on really well. As long as you're not letting it soak for 15-20 minutes, you're going to get a nice clean even finish from it. Gel stain I've just found to be more of a mess and more expensive and doesn't go quite as far, and just not my cup of tea. But a lot of people really love gel stains, so it's a personal preference in the end. Got enough time for 1-2 more?
I have 3.
Okay.
Think we can pull it off.
Let's do 3.
Okay. Tom West, ever heard of anyone using animal fat or tallow waxes?
Well, yeah, tallow or animal fat really isn't a finish as much as it is a, well, you know, a lot of my molding planes up here, the ones that are really dark, they're dark because of tallow or an oil that was put on there. A lot of that is for the lubrication of the sole. A lot of it is just for filling the wood. Most of it is for the lubrication of the sole. In the end, it's not quite as good as a paste wax, but slightly better than just an oil. So it's kind of like that thing. But yeah, I don't generally use that for a finish. I don't use it at all, but that was a very English thing to use on wood planes. What's next?
MJ wants to know, can you apply poly on top of a hard oil finish such as Osmo?
You can, but I don't know why you would want to. Osmo is already a protective surface, and if you want the poly film, then why spend the money on the Osmo? Yeah, you could, but I don't think I would want to. Because, I mean, both of these are going to give you about the same amount of actual protection of the wood. The Osmo shows you the wood grain more, whereas the poly will build up and become more of a sheen surface. And so if you want that sheen surface, then just use the poly. That way you don't have to spend the money for the Osmo, because that's the downside, is this stuff is expensive. So, but yeah, if you have this on there already and you want that sheen surface, then yeah, you can go ahead and put it on top. As long as it's cured, which is 4 hours, you're good. What's next?
Tony Wright said, I'm about to replace an outside doorway wood threshold with a nice piece of oak. Any advice on a finish? Water got under the yacht varnish on the last one and it rotted out.
Yeah, anytime you start talking about exterior finishes have to be addressed every year. Otherwise, they don't do well. Usually, the best thing is a marine varnish, and you want like 5 or 6 coats of that. And then every year you come back and you sand it and you apply another coat or 2. But there really is no good answer to it. The best thing is to use a penetrating epoxy, soak it into the wood, and it basically turns it into a plastic. And then you put on your marine varnish. And still, every year you're going to have to come back and reapply it, especially if it's in the sun. If it's in direct sun, you may end up having to do it every 6 months. It's just one of those things that there is no good answer for that. So, yeah, I think they'll do it. Am I missing anything?
I had one last question come in.
Okay, fine. We'll do one more.
All right, Kaleb Nab. Can you put water-based poly over oil-based stain?
If you wait several days, maybe, but generally no. Usually the answer for putting a water based on top of an oil base is a shellac. Shellac is your general binder. This will bind to anything, and anything will bind to this. And so usually this is your answer if you want to go from one to another, is put on some shellac in between. It doesn't have to be much, just one really thin, clean coat. And then you can put your other finish on top of that. So that's probably the best answer for that. Cool. Well, I think that will about do it. So come back next time, and we'll have more fun next week. I don't know what we'll be doing, but we'll be doing something.
Isn't it usually Q&A week?
No, it would be the one after that.
I thought the second week was Q&A week.
I usually do it whatever week ends with a teen.
Oh.
So it would be the 17th this month.
Okay. Whatever. Alrighty.
Cool. So, yeah, if I didn't get to your question, send me a message, and we'll talk about it next time. So I think I'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day.
Bye. Oh, no shirt drawing.